A cop laughs in court after arresting a man he thought was lying about being a U.S. Army general, but that laugh didn't last long. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio was quiet enough to hear the ticking of the clock above the judge's bench. Every eye turned toward the man sitting at the defense table. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in a dark gray suit, hands clasped in front of him, calm as stone. His name was General Marcus Tillman. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like any other middle-aged man fighting a petty charge. But the way he sat, straight, focused, respectful, gave him a quiet authority that most men never learned. Across the room, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, was Sergeant Derek Whitfield, the officer who arrested him. Derek wasn't hiding his attitude. He didn't care who saw it. He whispered something to another officer beside him, chuckled, and shook his head. "You telling me this guy's a U.S. Army general?" Derek scoffed under his breath, loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. "Man, please. He looks like he changes tires for a living." The courtroom burst with soft, awkward laughs. Even the clerk glanced up from her screen for a second. But Marcus didn't flinch. He kept his eyes forward, his breathing steady. Years of discipline taught him when silence spoke louder than anger. Then the judge entered, Judge Rachel Brenner, sharp as ever, with a voice that could cut through any room. "Let's bring this to order," she said, sitting down and scanning the files before her. Case number 4518. Defendant, Marcus Tillman, charged with obstruction and resisting arrest. The words hung in the air, ridiculous to anyone who actually knew the man. Marcus glanced briefly at his attorney, Anthony Graves, a young public defender who'd been assigned the case last minute. Anthony leaned close and whispered, "Sir, I know this looks bad, but keep calm. We'll get through this." "I've been calm my entire life," Marcus replied quietly, his voice deep but patient. "That's not the problem." Across the room, Derek leaned back and chuckled again, folding his arms like he owned the place. The arrogance was thick enough to feel it in the air. When the judge asked the officer to recount what happened, Derek wasted no time turning it into a story. "Your Honor, I stopped the defendant because he was acting suspiciously near a closed construction site. He got aggressive when I questioned him, refused to show ID, and started arguing about his rights." Anthony rolled his eyes. "Of course he did," he muttered under his breath. But Marcus didn't say a word. He just watched Derek talk, the same way he used to study enemy commanders through binoculars years ago, quiet, observant, waiting for the right move. The officer's confidence was almost cartoonish. "I had to detain him for my safety," Derek continued. "Man was reaching in his jacket, and I wasn't about to take chances. Turned out he had no reason to even be there." Marcus finally looked up. His gaze was sharp now, calm but cutting. "You didn't ask what I was doing," he said. "You assumed." Derek grinned. "Assumed? I knew something was off. I've been doing this job 15 years. I know trouble when I see it." A few people in the back shifted uncomfortably. The judge's eyebrows lifted just slightly. She'd seen plenty of cases like this. Anthony stood, straightened his tie, and said, "Your Honor, before we go any further, my client is a highly respected member of the United States military with over 3 decades of service. He wasn't loitering. He was inspecting a veterans housing project under federal contract." Derek laughed again. "Federal contract? For what? Cutting grass?" The laughter this time didn't spread far. The room went still. Marcus didn't move, but his silence carried more power than any insult. He turned slightly toward his lawyer and said softly, "He's not ready for what's coming." Anthony blinked, unsure what Marcus meant, but the tone made him believe it. The judge leaned forward. "General Tillman," she said, "you'll have your chance to speak. For now, we'll continue with testimony." Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." But deep down, he knew this was bigger than a traffic stop or a courtroom argument. Something about Derek's smug grin told him this wasn't just ignorance. It was arrogance that needed to be corrected in the right way. He sat back, folded his hands again, and waited. There was no anger on his face, just patience, the kind that made everyone around him a little nervous. But before anyone in that courtroom would understand who Marcus Tillman really was, they had to hear how it all started. One quiet evening on a deserted street just outside Toledo. It was late evening in Perrysburg, Ohio, a few miles south of Toledo. The sun had already dropped below the horizon and the air was still, carrying that faint smell of rain from earlier in the day. General Marcus Tillman was driving home from an inspection at a new veterans housing site. It had been a long day, the kind that made your back stiff and your mind wander. He wasn't in uniform that day, just a plain navy polo shirt and khaki pants. His car, a silver Ford Expedition, had government plates. Inside the passenger seat sat a thick binder of project notes, blueprints, and a sealed envelope marked Department of Defense. He'd planned to drop it off first thing in the morning. Up ahead, a police cruiser sat idling at a stop sign, lights off. As Marcus passed, he noticed the cruiser pull out behind him. He didn't think much of it, at least not at first. But the headlights stayed close, too close. He glanced at his rearview mirror, then at his speedometer. 41 in a 40 zone. Nothing unusual. Still, the cruiser followed. A minute later, flashing red and blue lights filled his back window. Marcus sighed, eased over to the shoulder, and put his hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. It wasn't his first time dealing with authority, but it was the first time he wasn't the one in command. The officer approached slowly. It was Sergeant Derek Whitfield, stocky, mid-40s, with a square jaw and the kind of stare that never came from caution, only ego. "Evening," Derek said, shining his flashlight through the window. "License and registration." Marcus reached carefully for his wallet. "Of course, officer." "May I ask what the issue is?" "You rolled through a stop sign back there," Derek replied flatly. Marcus blinked. "A stop sign?" "Yeah. You didn't make a complete stop. Been drinking tonight?" "No, sir," Marcus said evenly. "Just coming back from work." "Work, huh?" Derek leaned in slightly. "What kind of work?" "I'm with the U.S. Army," Marcus said, handing over his license. "General Marcus Tillman." Derek smirked. "General, huh? That's a new one. You military guys love throwing titles around." Marcus stayed quiet, watching him. "It's not a title, officer." "It's my job." Derek took the license and flashlighted it. "We'll see about that. Sit tight." He walked back to his cruiser. Marcus exhaled slowly. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was that familiar mix of exhaustion and disbelief. He'd spent decades serving his country, leading soldiers in combat zones, protecting men who looked exactly like Derek. Yet here he was, being treated like a suspect on the side of a road. After a few minutes, Derek returned, his tone sharper now. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked calmly. "I said step out." Marcus unbuckled and got out, his posture straight but non-threatening. Derek immediately positioned himself like he was ready for a confrontation. "I ran your plates," Derek said. "This car's registered to a federal agency. You want to tell me how you got it?" "I already did," Marcus replied. "It's a government-issued vehicle." Derek circled him slowly. "Government-issued? You think I'm stupid? People don't just drive around with plates like that." "I don't think you're stupid," Marcus said quietly, "but I think you're making assumptions." That one line hit Derek harder than Marcus expected. His jaw tightened. "Watch your tone," he snapped. "My tone?" Marcus asked, still composed. "I'm simply answering your questions." Derek stepped closer. "You think you're better than me, huh? With your fake badge and your big words?" "I never said that." "Hands on the hood," Derek ordered. Marcus hesitated for half a second, not out of defiance, just confusion. "For what reason?" "Suspicion," Derek barked. "Don't make me repeat myself." Marcus complied, resting his palms on the hood. The metal was still warm from the drive. He'd been through combat, hostage negotiations, bomb scares, but this moment, felt heavier than any of those, because this wasn't war. This was home. Derek began patting him down aggressively. "You carrying any weapons?" "I'm licensed to carry," Marcus replied, "but my firearm's locked in the glove box." "You're welcome to retrieve it yourself." "Oh, I will," Derek said, smirking again. "You military types love to test people. Let's see what you're really hiding." When he opened the passenger door, the first thing he saw was the binder and that sealed Department of Defense envelope. "What's this?" Derek asked. "Official documents," Marcus said. "Please handle them carefully." "Official documents might—" "Yeah, right." Derek scoffed. "You printing fake letters now?" Marcus's patience was thinning. "That's classified material, Sergeant." "You're not authorized to—" "Authorized?" Derek interrupted, laughing. "Man, you really think you're someone important, don't you?" Marcus didn't answer. He just looked down, almost disappointed. He'd seen arrogance before, but this wasn't confidence. It was ignorance wrapped in a badge. But Derek wasn't done yet. The real trouble was just beginning. Because when ego meets power, someone always gets hurt. Derek slammed the passenger door shut and stalked back toward Marcus, waving the sealed envelope like he'd just caught a criminal red-handed. "You want to tell me what this is?" he demanded. "I already did," Marcus said steadily. "It's a Department of Defense file. Classified housing reports." Derek's grin widened. "Classified? Man, you got jokes. You think saying big words is going to scare me?" "I'm not trying to scare you, officer," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm trying to make sure you don't break federal law by tampering with those documents." That was it. Derek's face turned red. "You don't tell me what the law is." "I don't need to," Marcus said quietly. "You swore to uphold it." For a second, Derek just stared at him, eyes hard, jaw set. Then he stepped closer until he was nearly nose to nose with Marcus. "Put your hands behind your back." Marcus blinked. "For what charge?" "Obstruction. Interfering with a police investigation." "What investigation?" Marcus asked, his voice still even. "This one," Derek said, pulling out his cuffs. The sound of metal clicking echoed down the empty road. Marcus didn't resist. He turned, let Derek cuff him, and kept his gaze straight ahead. Years of discipline taught him that sometimes restraint was the loudest protest. A passing car slowed down for a second, headlights washing over the two men. Marcus could feel the weight of that look, the way strangers assumed guilt before innocence. "Officer," Marcus said quietly, "I'd like to call my attorney." Derek laughed. "You can call whoever you want once we get to the station. Maybe they'll come pick you up from the drunk tank." "I haven't been drinking." "Yeah, and I'm the mayor of Toledo," Derek sneered. Marcus looked at him for a moment. "You should be careful how you treat people, Sergeant." "Why's that?" "You gonna file a complaint?" Derek mocked. "Go ahead. I'll have it buried before it leaves the front desk." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, you're not the one I'd be calling." That line caught Derek off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," Marcus said simply. "Let's go." Inside the cruiser, Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, hands cuffed, watching the rain begin to tap against the window. Derek was talking on his radio, bragging to dispatch that he'd picked up a suspicious subject with fake military credentials. Marcus closed his eyes. Not from fear, but from disbelief. After all these years serving his country, after countless nights overseas defending people he would never meet, this was the thanks he got. When they reached the precinct, the mood shifted. The desk officer looked up when Marcus was brought in. "What's the charge?" he asked. "Obstruction," Derek said proudly. "Guy was acting shady. Claimed he's some big-shot army general." The desk officer glanced at Marcus. "You got ID?" "It's in the binder he confiscated," Marcus replied. Derek rolled his eyes and tossed the binder onto the counter. The clerk opened it, flipped through the papers, then froze. Derek," he said slowly, "these are legitimate. They've got federal clearance tags. You sure you want to process this?" Derek frowned. "What are you talking about?" The clerk pointed at the letterhead. "This isn't fake, man. Look at the seals. You might want to make a call before you book him." Derek hesitated for a second but pushed it aside. "Nah, let's go ahead. I'm not falling for that fake document stuff. I've seen guys pull this." Before Marcus looked at the clerk, then back at Derek. "You're making a mistake." Derek leaned close, smirking again. "We'll see about that, General." Marcus said nothing, but the quiet in his voice carried weight, a kind of power that didn't need volume. When they put him in the holding cell, the door clanged shut, echoing through the concrete room. He sat on the bench, his posture still perfect, his breathing steady. A younger officer walked by, glanced in, and whispered to another, "He doesn't look like a troublemaker." The other officer shrugged. "Whitfield's been on edge lately. Let him have his win." But that win wouldn't last long, because within 24 hours, the truth about who Marcus Tillman really was would reach people far above Derek Whitfield's pay grade, and it would all come crashing down. The fluorescent lights in the holding cell flickered every few seconds, humming faintly above Marcus's head. It was past midnight now, and the station had quieted down to the occasional phone ringing and the shuffle of papers. He sat upright, his back against the cold concrete wall, watching the reflection of the hallway through the bars. Derek Whitfield walked by every now and then, pretending not to look in, but his smirk always gave him away. To him, this wasn't about law. It was about pride. He wanted Marcus to look small. When the desk officer finally approached, holding a clipboard, he hesitated. "Sergeant Whitfield," he called out, "I just got a call from the captain. He's asking why we've got a guy in custody with Department of Defense clearance." Derek waved him off. "Man, that's fake. He's running a scam. Captain's just paranoid about bad press." The desk officer frowned. "I don't know, man." His credentials checked out on the federal system. Derek froze for a second. "What?" "I said I ran his info through the database," the officer continued. "It came back verified. Major General Marcus Tillman, U.S. Army, current active status." For the first time that night, Derek didn't have anything to say. He muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the cell. Marcus looked up at him calmly. "Change of heart?" Derek stared at him, jaw tight. "Who the hell are you?" "I told you already," Marcus said. "You just didn't want to believe me." Derek stopped himself, his voice shaky now. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I did," Marcus replied, "more than once." The silence between them stretched. Derek finally turned away, mumbling, "Wait here." Marcus let out a slow breath. He could have made a scene. He could have pulled rank, shouted his title, called his connections the moment those cuffs went on, but he didn't. Because sometimes people needed to see their own arrogance play out before they'd ever understand it. A few minutes later, the door opened, and the captain, a tall woman with graying hair, walked in. "General Tillman," she said. Marcus stood. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Captain Elena Brooks," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "I am so sorry about this, sir. We've verified your identity and your credentials. You're free to go." "Thank you," Marcus said simply. Derek stood behind her, eyes down. He looked like a kid who'd just been caught stealing candy. The captain turned to him sharply. "Sergeant Whitfield in my office. Now." He followed, silent. Marcus gathered his binder and envelope from the desk, checking that everything was intact. The younger officer who had verified his credentials approached him carefully. "Sir, I just want to say, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. That never should have happened." Marcus nodded. "You're not the one who needs to apologize." As he walked toward the exit, he caught a glimpse through the glass window of Derek standing in the captain's office, getting chewed out. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just kept walking. Outside, the air felt heavy. The streetlights cast long shadows over the lot, and the sound of rain dripping from the awning filled the silence. He got into his SUV and started the engine, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were tired, but focused. The look of a man who had spent his whole life fighting battles that no one else wanted to see. As he drove away, he made one call, just one. It wasn't to a lawyer or a friend. It was to a number stored deep in his contacts, one labeled Office of the Secretary of the Army. "Sir," the voice on the other end said, "we've been informed of the situation." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, "but I'm not the one who needs help understanding what just happened." "Understood," the voice replied. "We'll handle it." Marcus ended the call, pulled into his driveway, and sat there for a moment. His house was quiet. The world was quiet. But inside him, there was that old familiar ache. The one that came from realizing some fights didn't end when you left the battlefield. But this wasn't over. The next morning, Marcus would walk back into that same courthouse, and the look on Sergeant Whitfield's face when he realized who he'd mocked in front of a judge would be something no one there would ever forget. The morning sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows in downtown Toledo. The light hit the marble floors just enough to give the room a calm glow, but there was nothing calm about what was about to happen inside. Marcus Tillman arrived early, dressed sharply in a pressed charcoal suit. He walked with that same slow, deliberate stride soldiers carried long after retirement. Shoulders squared, head high, not out of pride, but out of habit. Every step kowtowed down the hallway, drawing quiet glances from others waiting for their cases. Most didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another man in line for his day in court. At the other end of the hall, Sergeant Derek Whitfield leaned against a wall, flipping through his report file, pretending not to see Marcus approaching. His smirk was back, though not as strong as before. He still believed he had the upper hand. When Marcus stopped a few feet away, Derek finally spoke. "Didn't expect you to actually show up," he said. "I always show up," Marcus replied calmly. "It's part of my job." Derek laughed quietly. "Still keeping up that general story, huh? You got guts, I'll give you that." Marcus looked at him, not angry, not even surprised. "It's not a story, Sergeant. It's my life." Before Derek could respond, the bailiff opened the courtroom door and called, "All rise." Inside, the room was small but packed. A few reporters were present, local news types who loved a good police story. The judge, Rachel Brenner, sat tall behind the bench, flipping through her notes. "Case number 4518, she began. The state versus Marcus Tillman." Anthony Graves, Marcus's young attorney, leaned over. "Sir, we're going to let him speak first. Just stay calm." "I've been calm," Marcus said softly. "That's not what needs to change." The judge looked up. "Sergeant Whitfield, you filed this report. Please explain what happened." Derek stood, cleared his throat, and walked to the center of the room. "Yes, Your Honor. On the evening of September 14th, I observed the defendant acting suspiciously near a closed construction site. He refused to comply with my commands, became verbally combative, and resisted arrest." Marcus kept his eyes steady. Anthony interjected, "Your Honor, we have video evidence that says otherwise." Derek turned quickly. "What video?" Anthony smiled faintly. "Your body cam, Sergeant." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Play it." The room went silent as the bailiff rolled in a laptop and connected the footage. On screen, Derek's voice blared through the speakers, loud, mocking, and full of attitude. "Yeah, sure, you're a general," the recording played. "Next you'll tell me you work for the Pentagon." Then Marcus's calm reply followed. "Sir, please handle those documents carefully." The room shifted. People exchanged quiet looks. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. When the clip ended, Derek's smirk was gone. His face flushed red. Anthony stood. "Your Honor, my client did not resist. He complied, remained respectful, and identified himself multiple times. Yet he was arrested, mocked, and detained overnight, despite his verified military credentials." Judge Brenner folded her hands. "Sergeant, were you aware of the defendant's identity before detaining him?" Derek stammered. No, Your Honor. I thought he was lying. And when his credentials were verified, I didn't believe it." "You didn't believe a verified federal record?" the judge pressed. "Or you didn't want to?" The courtroom stayed silent. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, I don't want to press charges. I just want acknowledgement." Derek turned, confused. "Acknowledgement? Of what?" "That this isn't about one night or one arrest," Marcus said. "It's about respect, the kind every man deserves, uniform or not." Judge Brenner watched him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "General Tillman, do you wish to make a statement for the record?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, standing. He turned toward the court, facing Derek. "Sergeant, I've served my country for over 30 years. I've commanded soldiers who looked nothing like me, and I've buried men who died protecting people they never met. I didn't spend my life fighting for freedom just to be treated like a criminal on my own soil." Derek shifted, eyes dropping to the floor. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "You could have asked a question instead of making an accusation. You could have listened instead of assuming, but you didn't. You laughed." He paused, letting the words hang. Derek swallowed hard. The silence was brutal. The judge spoke again. "General, is there anything else you'd like to say before I make my ruling?" Marcus gave a faint smile. "Just one thing." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and said quietly, "Sometimes respect needs a reminder." And that's when he made the call, the one that would change everything. Marcus held the phone to his ear as the courtroom waited in a thick silence. Even the judge paused, unsure what he was doing. His tone was calm, measured, but there was something in his voice that made everyone sit up a little straighter. "Hello?" Marcus said quietly. "This is General Marcus Tillman. I need to report an incident involving local law enforcement in Toledo, Ohio. Yes, I'll hold." The courtroom was dead still except for the faint static of his speaker. Derek Whitfield shifted uneasily, whispering to the officer beside him, "He's bluffing. There's no way he's calling." Then the voice on the line came through, firm and unmistakably official. General Tillman, we've been expecting your call. The Secretary's office is aware of the situation. You're on speaker with the Inspector General of the Army and the Office of Public Affairs. Are you currently in court? Yes, Marcus replied evenly. The arresting officer and the presiding judge are present. Judge Brenner's eyes widened. General, is this an official communication? Yes, ma'am, Marcus said simply, and it's being logged. The entire courtroom froze. The bailiff straightened his posture. Derek went pale. The voice continued, We'll have a representative from the Department of Defense present within the hour. Please remain where you are. Yes, sir, Marcus said before hanging up. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked around the room. Not smug, not angry, just composed. Judge Brenner cleared her throat, her tone now careful. General Tillman, I think it's best we take a brief recess. Marcus nodded. That would be wise, Your Honor. As she struck the gavel, the courtroom broke into murmurs. The reporters who'd been half asleep earlier were now scrambling for their phones, whispering into recorders. Derek stood frozen, watching Marcus walk past him toward the hallway. Wait, he said, his voice shaking. Who was that? Marcus stopped, turned slightly, and looked him in the eye. The people who make sure men like me, and you, are held accountable. He walked out of the courtroom, leaving Derek standing there, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Outside, in the hallway, Anthony Graves caught up with Marcus. Sir, did that really just happen? Marcus gave a faint smile. Son, when you spend enough time serving your country, you learn a few numbers that matter more than lawyers. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Anthony said quietly, You could have crushed him the moment you were arrested. Why wait until now? Marcus looked toward the courtroom doors, because he needed to show everyone who he really was first. Now, nobody can deny it. Back inside, Derek sat alone at the defense table. His partner leaned over. Man, what's going to happen? Derek didn't answer. He knew. The call wasn't a bluff. And if what he'd just heard was true, this wasn't staying local. The Department of Defense didn't take lightly to one of their own being humiliated in a civilian courtroom. 45 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. 2 men and 1 woman walked in, all wearing dark suits with small gold pins on their lapels. The air changed instantly. Even the judge stood. Representatives from the U.S. Army Office of Legal Affairs, one of them announced. We're here on behalf of General Tillman. The reporters' cameras clicked like a chorus of crickets. Derek's throat went dry. The lead representative handed a document to the judge. Your Honor, we are requesting the immediate dismissal of all charges against General Tillman and the opening of an internal review into Sergeant Derek Whitfield's conduct. The Department of Defense will also be issuing a formal statement to the press. Judge Brenner nodded, her expression tight but respectful. So ordered. She turned toward Derek. Sergeant, I suggest you get representation. He stared down at the floor, his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by something Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. Shame. As the representatives walked toward Marcus, one of them said quietly, General, we apologize on behalf of everyone who should have known better. Marcus extended his hand, apology accepted. But this isn't about me. It's about what's right. The man nodded. We'll make sure that message is heard loud and clear. Marcus turned and looked once more toward Derek. Their eyes met for a brief second, not in anger, but in quiet understanding of how far pride can fall when truth shows up in the room. But even with the courtroom turning in his favor, Marcus wasn't done. There was still one thing left to say, not for revenge, but for redemption. The courthouse emptied out slowly that afternoon, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered in the air. Word had already spread. Reporters clustered outside, cameras rolling, voices overlapping as they shouted questions about the Toledo incident. Inside, the judge's chambers were quiet. Sergeant Derek Whitfield sat alone in a chair, his badge and service weapon laid neatly on the table in front of him. He wasn't handcuffed, not yet, but the humiliation was worse than any punishment he could have imagined. His world, built on control and authority, had crumbled in front of a crowd. The door opened, and Captain Elena Brooks walked in. She'd been called in from the precinct. She looked tired, disappointed. You know why I'm here, she said flatly. Derek nodded without looking up. Yeah. They're putting you on administrative leave, she continued, pending review. But between you and me, she paused. It's not looking good. Derek finally looked up, his voice cracking just a little. I messed up. Brooks sighed. No, you didn't just mess up, Whitfield. You embarrassed the department, the city, and yourself. That man could have destroyed your career with one phone call, and instead he just let the truth do the talking. He swallowed hard, eyes red. I thought he was lying. That's the problem, she said quietly. You thought. You didn't ask. You didn't listen. For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt heavier than before. Meanwhile, out in the courthouse hallway, Marcus stood with Anthony Graves and the DOD representatives. Reporters tried to push through the crowd, shouting, General Tillman! General Tillman! Do you have a statement? He turned toward them, his expression calm but serious. I do, he said. The microphones extended toward him like metal arms. I've served this country for over 30 years, he began, and I've seen men of every color and background fight side by side. Not because they were the same, but because they believed in the same thing, justice, respect, honor. He paused, scanning the crowd. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. Not because of the color of their skin, or the clothes they wear, or the car they drive. Respect should not be earned through rank or reputation. It should be automatic until proven otherwise. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the reporters lowered their cameras slightly. Marcus continued, I'm not here to ruin a man's life. I'm here to remind people what happens when we stop seeing each other as human beings. When we let fear or arrogance dictate how we treat one another, we lose something far greater than pride. We lose our integrity. The DOD representative beside him nodded subtly. Anthony, still standing nearby, leaned in and whispered, That was perfect, sir. Marcus shook his head slightly. It's not perfect, son, but it's honest. As he left the building, one of the local journalists, a young woman named Dana Morales, called out softly, General, will you forgive him? Marcus stopped at the top of the courthouse steps and turned back. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen, he said. It's about refusing to carry someone else's ignorance as your own burden. Dana lowered her mic slowly. The crowd stayed silent. Later that evening, footage of Marcus's speech aired on every major local station, and by midnight it was trending online. People were arguing in the comments, sharing stories, reflecting on what they'd seen. At home, Marcus sat in his living room, the TV still playing muted in the background. He didn't need to watch. He'd lived it. He glanced at the folded American flag sitting on the shelf above his fireplace, the one that had traveled with him through 3 tours overseas. It reminded him why he'd chosen silence when he could have chosen power. Because real strength didn't shout. It endured. Across town, Derek sat in his small apartment, staring at the letter that confirmed his suspension. His phone buzzed with messages from reporters and coworkers, but he ignored them all. For the first time in years, he didn't have a comeback or a defense. He picked up his phone, opened a new contact, and hesitated before typing, General Marcus Tillman. He didn't expect an answer, but he called anyway. The line rang twice before a voice picked up. This is Tillman. Derek cleared his throat. General, it's Whitfield. I don't expect you to talk to me, but I needed to say it anyway. I was wrong. All the way wrong. I let pride get in the way of doing my job right. Marcus was silent for a moment. You've taken the first step, Sergeant. The next one's harder. I know, Derek said quietly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I believe you, Marcus replied. Now make sure your actions believe you too. He ended the call gently. Derek sat there, staring at the phone, his own reflection faintly visible in the dark screen. For the first time, he didn't see a badge or authority, just a man who'd finally been forced to face himself. But Marcus knew something deeper than punishment had taken place that day. This wasn't just about a courtroom or a headline. It was about what happens when dignity meets ignorance and wins without hatred. The following week passed quietly. No press conferences, no new statements. Just the hum of daily life moving on, while somewhere beneath it all, lessons settled in the minds of those who had seen the story unfold. General Marcus Tillman went back to his routine, early mornings, black coffee, and checking in with the veterans' housing project he'd been overseeing. The men on site treated him with a kind of reverence now, not because of the headlines, but because they'd heard what he'd done and how he'd handled it. One of the younger workers, Devin, approached him during lunch. Sir, I saw the video, he said shyly. That cop, Man, I don't know how you stayed that calm. Marcus smiled faintly. You don't win every battle by swinging back, son. Sometimes you win by standing still and letting the truth speak for you. Devon nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. As the day went on, Marcus found himself thinking about Derek Whitfield, about the call, about the sound of genuine remorse in the man's voice. He wasn't naive. He knew one apology didn't erase years of arrogance or prejudice, but he also knew change had to start somewhere. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch, the sun low and orange over the Ohio sky. He held a letter in his hand, one that had arrived earlier that day. The return address read, Toledo Police Department. He opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. General Tillman, I've been ordered to attend retraining, but this isn't about orders. I wanted you to know that I'm going. Not because I have to, but because I need to. You didn't humiliate me. You showed me who I'd become. I won't forget that. Derek Whitfield. Marcus folded the letter neatly and set it on the table beside him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile fully. He whispered to himself, that's a start. The next morning, Marcus was invited to speak at a local community center. Veterans, police officers, and students filled the seats. He stood at the podium in his uniform, not because he wanted to show rank, but because he wanted to remind people what discipline looked like. I'm not here to talk about one bad cop or one bad day, Marcus began. I'm here to talk about what happens when people stop listening to each other. He glanced around the room, faces of every color and age looking back at him. Respect isn't a reward, he said. It's a responsibility. It's what you give to people before you judge them, not after. He paused. You want to change the world? Start with how you treat the person standing in front of you. That's where justice begins. Not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in a conversation. The room was still. No one moved. Afterward, a young police cadet approached him and said, Sir, I think I needed to hear that. Marcus smiled. We all do, son. Even me. As he left the community center, the same reporter from the courthouse, Dana Morales, stopped him again. General, after everything that's happened, do you feel justice was served? Marcus thought about it. Justice? He said quietly. Maybe. But justice without understanding doesn't last. Understanding, that's what changes people. Dana lowered her mic. And forgiveness? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's what separates discipline from revenge. Later that night, Marcus sat once again in his living room. The letter from Derek was still on the table. The folded flag caught the glow of the lamp beside it. He leaned back in his chair, the faint creak of wood filling the silence. In his mind, he replayed everything. The stop, the cuffs, the laughter, the phone call, the look on Derek's face when the truth hit. But what he remembered most wasn't anger. It was the moment Derek called to apologize, because that, in its own small way, was victory. He stood, turned off the lamp, and said softly to himself, Some wars aren't fought overseas. Some are fought right here in how we choose to treat each other. The house went dark. The night air was cool, still carrying the faint sounds of the city, quiet, steady, alive. And that's the thing about respect. It costs nothing to give, but it changes everything when you do. If this story moved you, take a second today to look at how you treat people, at work, on the street, online. Respect doesn't start with a title or a uniform. It starts with you. Share this story with someone who needs that reminder, and let's make understanding louder than hate.